Today, farming is as technical as any other commercial enterprise. Modern methods of production have considerably reduced manual effort on the farm, but in many cases we're still having to use old buildings which were put up to serve totally different purposes. Buildings need to be geared to present-day systems, which aim at outputs far in excess of anything that could have been envisaged even a few years ago. Nowadays, dairies are being designed to hold bulk storage tanks, and permanent roads are laid right to the collecting point. A giant tanker can take on the entire yield of 200 cows in a matter of minutes. Although older methods are still in use, they are being obliged to give way under economic pressure. Furthermore, farming and its associated services are having to rely more and more on a shrinking labor force. As farm machines increase in number, size and complexity, the buildings to accommodate them have to be designed and planned accordingly. The implement shed of the horse and cart age no longer applies. Until the last century, the character of farms was largely determined by local needs, and they were constructed in the materials available in the area. Lovely to look at when they are preserved and maintained, they are an integral part of our national heritage and have much to teach us about the relationship of buildings and the countryside. Many old buildings are worthy of preservation, and though not functional in the modern sense, are often capable of serving some useful purpose on the farm. It was around the middle of the 19th century that the first attempts were made at farmstead planning on a comprehensive scale. In its day, this model farm was the outcome of scientific thinking, an attitude which has become more and more important throughout the whole of agriculture. The scientific approach to planning must always satisfy the agricultural requirements of the present, and if possible, take into account future development too. The distinguishing features of modern agriculture are a high degree of mechanization, a tendency towards specialization, and the intensification of enterprises. An efficient pig unit concentrates production in one area. Mechanical means are employed to feed the pigs, clean out the pens, and ventilate the houses. Very specialized enterprises usually involve high capital investment, which can be justified only by the optimum use of labor and equipment. The layout is designed with this end in view and should incorporate provision for future extensions. Good buildings are the tools of successful management. Nevertheless, the cost of building is relatively high, and therefore the whole project must be seen to be economically worthwhile. Functional and economic considerations apart, farm buildings can be made to look well. Here, by a main road, the new frame building for cattle on the site of the original hovels might have looked out of place. As it is, by sympathetic treatment, the scene has been saved. There will always be a place for the rural craftsman, but traditional methods and materials are rarely suited to modern farm building designs. However, by careful choice of site and the selection of materials and color, buildings can be planned that are not out of harmony with their environment. Everyone recognizes the need to preserve our countryside, and no one has a larger part to play in this than the farmer. How then does the farmer tackle the planning of buildings for his present and future needs? Of course, every case is different, but the principles are the same. To help him with his particular problem, Farmer Chu has called in the Agricultural Land Service of the Ministry of Agriculture. In this way, he can have general advice from land agents, architects and surveyors who have access to work on farm buildings carried out at centres all over the world. Such a place is the Farm Buildings Centre at Stoneleigh, where information is collected and evaluated. The digest, produced by the Farm Buildings Centre, reports on current developments. All the services of the centre are available for reference by professional people concerned with farm buildings and design. Here, there are exhibitions of building materials for use in agriculture. It's against this background, and with practical experience in the field, that the advisor can decide on the first step. Here, he has recommended that Mr. Chu should have a look at some methods in use on other farms. Although this whole setup is much larger than anything Mr. Chu would require, he is gaining invaluable information not only on methods of grain storage, but also on the choice of system and the manner in which the installation was planned and built. On this farm, the first answer to the need for a modern system of grain storage were these outdoor bins with ventilated floors. At the time of building, the arable acreage was being increased and the existing buildings were inadequate. That problem was much the same as the one that now faces Mr. Chu. From a centre reception pit, grain is conveyed by movable auger to any one of the bins where it is dried and stored until it suits the farmer's convenience to move it off the farm. The bin system is complete in itself and easy to operate with the minimum amount of labour. At the time when the bins were installed, this system was quite adequate. However, with improved methods of husbandry, yields per acre were increased, and when further land was added to the farm, more storage was necessary. Fortunately, as a result of good planning, the site was well served with hard roads, and there was plenty of room for putting up additional buildings with connections for the existing setup. At this stage, it was decided to install a continuous dryer capable of dealing with the entire crop. This called for the erection of self-emptying holding bins, together with elevators and conveyors. With such high-speed equipment, it is possible to load the grain in the minimum amount of time. This fully mechanized and labor-saving system was a definite improvement on the original scheme. Under cover, grain may be offloaded whatever the weather, a distinct advantage from the point of view of the workers involved. The steel tubes over the large capacity reception pit are designed to take loads of the heaviest vehicles and are close enough together to prevent even the smallest child from falling through. Incidentally, the levels on this site were such that there was no problem in draining the pit, which on other less fortunate sites can be quite a major operation. Here, from the rear of the site, the relationship between the outdoor silos and the second stage of the development can be fully appreciated. There, in the center of the complex, is the continuous dryer. And so, to the third and final stage, a large capacity bulk store linked to the two previous stages by a top conveyor. The bulk store is a steel-framed building with an uninterrupted clear span of 60 feet, with sufficient door space to permit access for combines, lorries, and other farm implements. When not holding grain, this type of building can provide shelter for expensive machinery and for carrying out repairs. The multi-purpose features of this store might be of particular interest to Mr. Chu. An installation of this kind, developed over a period of years, has much to offer in terms of ideas and methods. But what about planning on a small budget and an entirely different context? The visiting farmer here is concerned in finding a means of housing an increased number of cows and bringing up to date his milking facilities. As with his host, shortage of capital is a limiting factor. Even so, it's surprising what can be achieved with some imaginative planning. The new dairy is nothing more than an extension in concrete blocks to an original cowshed. A very simple building with a concrete floor, good ventilation, and an asbestos lean-to roof, large enough to take a bulk milk tank at a later date. With only minor alterations to the old cowshed, it was possible to install a 3-unit, 6-standing abreast parlour, leaving sufficient space for a return passage for the cows. A supporting post carries the roof in place of the exterior wall, which was removed to give necessary width to the parlour. Natural lighting is provided by windows of translucent plastic. What was previously an open yard has now been roofed over to form the collecting area for the cows before milking. The old barn, sited across the yard from the parlour, proved a handy location for storing barley. By installing a rolling mill, the farmer is able to prepare and hold the feeding ration in the most convenient place. Having converted the existing buildings almost entirely by his own labour and at the minimum cost, the farmer then had to make provision for housing the growing herd. It seems obvious now, but the decision to erect a new shed adjacent to the old buildings was arrived at as a result of the right kind of planning. Bearing in mind his limited budget, he chose to have a concrete frame structure clad in asbestos supplied and erected by the manufacturers. Inside this basic shell, he was able to use his own labour to put in the cubicle divisions and lay the concrete curb and floor. On an all-grass farm, sawdust is a natural choice for bedding, and all that is needed for cleaning out is to scrape the slurry down the centre passage and out onto the exterior concrete. At the far end of the cubicle house, an extension is already planned. The system used here is self-feed silage, and the slurry from this area is scraped down as before and into the slurry pit. The effluent from the pit is lifted by a tractor-driven pump and sprayed through a system of jointed pipes directly onto the land. In the course of his day-to-day work, the advisor comes to know the outstanding examples of successful planning. In this way, he is able to put the farmer, who is looking for guidance, in touch with others who have already dealt with problems of a similar character. Mind you, although comparisons can be made, the circumstances are never quite the same. Take, for example, this case. The farmer here was desperate. His buildings were dilapidated and beyond economic repair. From these premises, he had to manage a medium-sized arable farm and build up a pig enterprise. In this situation, the hand labour involved in carting food and mucking out could never be in proportion to the profitability of the pig enterprise. The old thatched barn was the only storage for the entire farm, but without doubt, a fundamental problem was the nuisance factor arising from the pigs. The planning authority was adamant that if more pigs were to be kept and fattened on the farm, then they must be housed away from the old farmstead, which was built as part of the village. Through the village flows a trout stream, an exceptional amenity. Pollution from livestock is a serious matter, and river authorities are making every effort to prevent untreated farm effluents from reaching such streams as this. As a result of early consultations and discussions with all the interested parties, a plan was produced which satisfied everyone. A new farmhouse, well sited to overlook both the new development up on the hill and the old farmstead. A location for the new fattening house was chosen away from the village, yet adjacent to a good public road. This scheme takes care of effluent by means of a tanker disposal system. The site permits easy access for vehicles collecting pigs without their having to drive through the farm, a distinct advantage in minimizing the risk of disease. A prefabricated timber building, incorporating modern design principles, requires the minimum of labor both for looking after the pigs and the maintenance of the structure. When pigs are kept in this way, careful control of temperature, humidity and ventilation is essential. Here, 120 pigs can be fed in a matter of minutes, whereas in the old buildings, the task would have been time-consuming and laborious. With bulk hoppers on the doorstep, feeding stuffs are easily brought onto the site and thence into the piggery. This large storage building was put up as part of the first stage of the overall development. What an improvement on the old timber-framed barn. In this spacious area can be stored grain, potatoes, fertilizers and farm machinery. A planned start to a scheme which anticipates the eventual transference of the farm out of the village onto this more suitable position. A position which brings the center of operations into the heart of the farm. By looking at other farms, the man with development in mind is better equipped to decide on the best course of action. If you remember, on our first farm, Mr. Chu had decided to improve his methods of storage. He realized that in doing so, he would have to improve the access to the farm. He appreciated that this was a problem rather outside his own farming experience, and it was one on which he ought to take advice, in the first place from the local officer of the Agricultural Land Service. The Land Service officer responsible for Mr. Chu's area decides that this is a case for bringing in the Farm Buildings Advisory Officer. In due course, having looked over the buildings and seen the way in which they are being used, the advisor and Mr. Chu discuss the farm policy which he has decided to follow. Together, they try to visualize a layout that is suited to the needs of this new policy. He is reminded about the value of visiting other farms where building work has been carried out on projects which have something in common with his own. Most farmers visit agricultural shows, and many of the stands feature various aspects of buildings for the farm. Among the displays and exhibits that are on the Ministry of Agriculture's stands is the bookstall. Here are to be found such publications as the Fixed Equipment on the Farm series, which deals with all aspects of farm building design. The Ministry's stand is a popular meeting place and centre for picking up information about local events such as farm walks, various types of demonstrations and open days. It is on these visits, specially organised for farmers, that the economic planning behind a whole project can be seen and appreciated. Capital investment in buildings and other fixed equipment can be extremely high, and like any other investment, must show an adequate return. A thorough analysis of the farm's policy must be made, and the likely financial outcome of introducing new or improved systems assessed before plans are even drafted. And that is how it has been back on Mr. Chu's farm, and now the Ministry's advisor has prepared sketch plans and preliminary estimates. These are now being considered by Mr. Chu, and it is at this stage that he has brought in his professional building advisor, in this case a surveyor, although the farmer might equally well have engaged an architect or some other consultant. From now on, the legal responsibility for executing the scheme lies entirely with the surveyor. He has by now prepared draft final plans and costings, and has brought these for his client to confirm that the scheme, as drawn up, will meet the farmer's detailed requirements. The layman often experiences difficulty in reading plans and following specifications and costings. In this respect, the information previously gathered by Mr. Chu in talking to the Farm Buildings Advisory Officer, reading up the subject, and in visiting other projects is of considerable help. Not only must the farmer understand the plan, he must also be certain at every stage that he appreciates what will be involved in managing the proposed plant. When the farmer has agreed the plan, it has to be submitted to the local building authority. In common with building proposals of all kinds, it must be approved under the statutory building regulations. With this approval and planning permission obtained, which was necessary in this case, the surveyor submits the proposals, together with competitive tenders, to the Ministry of Agriculture for consideration in respect of a grant under the Farm Improvement Scheme. Incidentally, grants are only paid on schemes that have been given prior approval and subsequently completed to the satisfaction of the Ministry's inspecting officer. And so, work on the site is begun, a level, unobstructed area behind the old buildings, which can be conveniently served by a new road that is to be laid from the public highway. The time scheduled for completion has also been planned in relation to the farming program. The intention is that the grain store will be ready to receive the harvest. Although the contractor has his own agent on the site to supervise and manage the contract, it is the surveyor who remains responsible to his client. His frequent visits to the site ensure that the materials and workmanship conform to the specifications. His constant contact with the job means that he can make decisions on the spot and so avoid unnecessary hold-ups. Any variations that have to be made can be authorized promptly. The grain store has implement accommodation on one side and could take another lean-to for young cattle. The building completed, there still remains the final inspection by the Ministry under the terms of the Farm Improvement Scheme. The inspector is concerned to see that the work has been done in accordance with the plans and specifications which were previously submitted to and approved by the Ministry. The amount of grain to be handled this year is considerably greater than in the past. Mr. Chu put down more acreage to wheat, anticipating that he would have use of the new store in time for harvest. Most of the grain has to come in by way of the new concrete road, which will more than prove itself when heavy transport is used to take grain off the farm. By careful and detailed planning of the whole project with all his requirements in mind, the farmer now has a system that suits his farm and his labor force. The entire crop is now being handled in bulk from the field to ultimate storage. Here is a handling system and a building which Mr. Chu is satisfied will serve the needs of his own particular farming policy for many years to come. It is the outcome of his conscious decision made in the light of the best technical knowledge available at the time. The responsibility for the decision must always be that of the farmer. However, looking back, it's clear that the project has been completed successfully only as a result of the joint and coordinated efforts of many people with widely different skills. And that is the recipe of real planning. There is nothing remarkable about the building, or indeed about any of these buildings. The old farmsteads of the past served a farm economy that was based on plentiful labor and horsepower. In the same way, today's buildings must be an integral part of the modern business of agriculture that is based on the scientific facts and economic principles of our time.